There is a well-known and somewhat ironic midrash about the giving of the Torah. God approached a nation wanting to give the Torah. And at first they said, wait a minute, give us an example of something in the Torah. To which God replied, thou shalt not murder. No, we don't want it. In these parts we murder. Thank you very much. God approached a second nation. God offered them the Torah, and they also wanted an example of something in the Torah. To which God replied, thou shalt not steal. No, we steal around here. We don't want it. As you can see, these nations saw in the Torah a bunch of obstacles, difficult things to follow. They didn't understand that there were things that could actually make their lives wonderful, could enhance their lives. They only saw obstacles. God approached the people of Israel and offered them the Torah, and they immediately said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will hear it and we will understand it. They saw ways that the Torah could enhance their lives, could make their lives better. I think of this story every summer as I drive up to Camp Ramah in New England to direct the Tikva program, an overnight camping and vocational training program for young adults with disabilities, including Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy, and other disabilities. The Tikva program, which has been around for 45 years, almost never got started. Somewhere around 1968, two Long Island special educators, Herb and Barbara Greenberg, had what sounded like a crazy idea at the time. They wanted to take campers with disabilities and put them side by side in the same Jewish summer camp with typical campers. Now, back in those days, people with disabilities were really kept separate in education and in all spheres. But they wanted to bring them to the same camping program. They pitched the idea to a number of Jewish camps, and the idea was rejected. They suggested it within their own Ramah camping movement. And again, directors raised all kinds of nervousness. The typical campers would leave. It would disrupt the structure of camp. The level of Hebrew would go down. It would cost too much. But one lone director, Donnie Edelman, Zichrono Livracha, said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will take it, the Tikva program, and we will take them, those young adults with disabilities, and put them inside of the typical camp. Donnie reasoned that if it wasn't for having this program in camp, why should Ramah exist? He saw it as a moral issue. What Donnie didn't understand at the time is that having people with disabilities in his camp also made good business sense. Parents of Tikva campers wondered what would happen to their children when they graduated from camp. Now, every camp director is faced with having to hire probably 200 staff members to work in his or her camp. That includes bunk counselors, dance teachers, Hebrew teachers, archery teachers, lifeguards, and also people to do some of the more repetitive jobs that might not seem so interesting for everybody, things like working in the kitchen or delivering mail and packages. The Greenbergs had another terrific idea. They decided to create a vocational training program. Perhaps one day, people with disabilities might be able to work in camp and fill some of those difficult to hire jobs. Some of those campers actually worked in camp for full salary, and some of them came back for 5, 10, or even 15 years. Perhaps the best story is the story of David Dalnikov. David was a camper of mine in 1984. He then became part of the vocational training program, and then he progressed to be a full salaried member of camp. Every day, David would take his red wagon, he would go to the front office, to the Misrad, to the Merkaz, and he would take the mail, and he would deliver it to A side, he would deliver it to B side, always with a smile on his face. David worked in camp for 27 years. David took the skills that he learned in camp and he brought them to his home community of New Haven, Connecticut, And David was employed for 15 years at the Hopkins School, a private high school. Every day, David arrived on time for work, and the boss really came to rely on David very much. One day, Mr. Downikov, David's father, and David came to the Hopkins School to talk to the boss. They shared with the boss that the time was coming for them to realize their dream. The Downikovs had always wanted to make Aliyah. They had always wanted to go to Israel and fulfill their dream. When the boss heard this news, he began to cry. He saw in David so much more than a person with a disability. He saw a very reliable worker, and he was thinking to himself, how in the world am I going to replace this very reliable, hardworking guy? And plus, how come the Downikovs couldn't just go to Israel by themselves and leave David here? What the boss did not realize is that David had also always wanted to make Aliyah. He wanted to move to Israel. Several months ago, I had the privilege of visiting the Downikovs in their Jerusalem apartment. They even hosted me for the night in their apartment, which is very kind. And I had hoped to spend some time talking with David. But David is a very busy man. David gets up every morning. He goes to Minyan at his local synagogue. He takes Ulpan classes. He does Jewish learning. And then every day from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., David works at the Ramada Hotel in Jerusalem. David's lovely Israeli Arab boss was at first very nervous when he saw David. Oh my goodness, how is he going to be able to handle the job? Within a very short period of time, the boss began to appreciate David's skills. David was reliable. David got the job done. How many Davids work in your synagogue? How many Davids work in your JCC, in your local day school? Now, there are some stories of people who are hired, people with disabilities, who do work in these various settings. But they sometimes hire people to be kind. They do it because it's a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah. If you look in the book of Genesis, in the story of Adam and Eve, we are taught that Adam and Eve were put in the Garden of Eden, le'ovda u'leshomra. They were put there to work and to care for it. In the book of Exodus and also in the book of Deuteronomy, we are taught 6 days we are to work, and on the seventh day we rest. Work is such a basic Jewish value. We're supposed to work hard. And there are stories of people with disabilities who are willing to work hard and will sometimes fill jobs that can be repetitive and maybe not that interesting to other people who are neurotypical. And there are some moving stories of people with disabilities at their job site. But how many business owners, how many companies, how many heads of Jewish organizations hire people with disabilities because they are moved? The case for good old-fashioned capitalism is much more compelling. Former Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa, the lead author of the 25-year-old Americans with Disabilities Act, recently told the story of his brother Frank. Frank is deaf, and Frank had a very hard time finding meaningful work. Frank decided that he wanted to work in a machine shop with his hands. One owner of a machine shop gave him an opportunity, and Frank was employed building jet engine nozzles in a machine shop. It turns out that Frank never missed a day of work for 10 years, and Frank never made a mistake. The boss was puzzled. He had no idea why this is the case. And he asked Frank, how come you're so good? Frank said, because it's a very noisy machine shop. I don't hear anything. I can just focus on my work. The boss proceeded to hire a number of other workers who were also deaf. There are examples from companies you've heard of who are similarly hiring people with disabilities. Companies like Walgreens and Marriott are realizing that hiring people with disabilities is good for the bottom line. Companies like 3M, companies like Uniqlo, they're realizing that people with disabilities are often willing to stay, and they're not looking to move up the corporate ladder. They'll stay for a very long time. And it's hard to replace people to do those kind of jobs if you have to hire new people every couple of months. Hiring people with disabilities is good for morale at the job site. If you go to the distribution center for Walgreens in Connecticut or in other places, you will see 40% of the labor force has a disability in the distribution center, working side by side with a typical worker. Hire a person with a disability, and it is good for market share. If you walk into a Target store in the Boston area, you may just be greeted by Julie, one of my former Tikva campers, who will gladly assist you. Or go purchase a jacket in a Uniqlo store, and you will find a company committed to hiring at least one person with a disability per store. Now, there are examples out there in the Jewish world of hiring people with disabilities. But in a lot of ways, we're holding on to this old idea that people with disabilities are a burden, that they're an obstacle, that maybe hiring them is just a nice thing to do. But it turns out that our tradition teaches us that in all labor, there is profit. People with disabilities are good for the bottom line, and they have so much potential. We are taught in the book of Psalms, Even ma'asu habonim haita lerosh pina. The stone that the builder has cast off has become the cornerstone. We have this wonderful opportunity to hire people with disabilities, and they may just become the cornerstone of your institution, and we will all profit. Thank you.